Hey guys, Mike for Sim Racing 604, and today I'm going to be sharing my thoughts on attending my first ever F1 race live, dining well above my tax bracket, and why my perspective on F1 racing has changed forever. Alright, so to set the stage, basically I flew from Vancouver to Montreal as a guest, and we sat and took in the 2022 Canadian Grand Prix in Montreal from the comfort of the Paddock Club. And of course, this was the first race back in Montreal since the pandemic. So 2019 was the last race in Canada, and last F1 race that is in Canada. So the crowd was hyped. There was a good energy. On Saturday, we arrived. It was raining. It was miserable, but I got to walk the pit lane and see all the cars and hear the cars for the first time. And you notice, the first thing you notice, first of all, they're very loud cars. Second of all, the cars are tiny because we would see them with the front wing pulled off and the four wheels pulled off, and there isn't much to that car at all. It's just, it looks almost like a bobsled when it has the front wing and tires off, and just looks totally different in person than you would imagine. Fully assembled, they look rather large and intimidating, but pulled apart with the tires and front wing off, and they look tiny. There's not much to that body at all. So for Saturday, we sat basically above the Mercedes garage. Mercedes is all the way to the front of the pit area. Behind them is Red Bull, and then beside that is Ferrari. And we sat basically above Mercedes, which put us pretty close to the start-finish line to take in the qualifying. And we got to see the cars, of course, do their qualifying laps in the wet with these huge tails, these huge spray tails, rooster tails, whatever you want to call them, coming up behind the cars. And one of the first things I noticed that sort of changed my perspective on F1 racing is the sounds. And the sounds, people want to say that the V10 era sounded amazing, V12s, V8s of the past sounded amazing, and these V6 turbos don't sound great. And by comparison, that may be true, but that's not to say they don't sound good at all. They were very loud and intimidating sounding cars, and to be that close to it, you really get a sense of just how loud and great these things sound. Now again, I didn't have the luxury of taking in the V10 era. Did it sound better in person? Of course it did, but for just context, it's not as if these 2022 cars sound bad. And so we watched qualifying and saw what went down with that, and of course Fernando Alonso got P2 and the crowd went wild. And that was another thing that really changed how I view F1, is that crowd energy. You just don't get that at home. As much as they want to pan to the crowd and show cheering and that, to be there and to feel that energy is something else. There was a lot of respect for Lewis Hamilton first and foremost. There was just like this aura and just like this energy about Lewis that people couldn't take their eyes off. And you saw even when they lined up on the grid before the race, all the cameras and so many people were just gathered around him. Meanwhile, the reigning champion, Max Verstappen, he had a lot of press, but nothing like Lewis. Lewis just had this gravity to him that just pulled people in. So there's a lot of respect for Lewis, a lot of respect for Fernando, again, qualifying second and really putting on a show in qualifying was amazing. He had a huge roar of applause. Max Verstappen, there's a lot of Max fans there, a lot of orange in the crowd, which I couldn't tell if it was for McLaren or for Max, but anyway, a lot of support for him, big cheers for him, and then Sebastian Vettel as well. So we have 4 champions on the grid, which we had last season as well, because Kimi was still there, but cool to see 4 World Drivers Champions on the grid, and again, that huge crowd energy for each of them was just really neat to see. And then on day 2, the Sunday, the race day, the sun came out, it was bright, it was beautiful, and we basically took position in the seats, in the 3 rows of seating, a little bit closer to the start-finish line. It was only probably 10 feet to the left of where we took it in qualifying, but it was a little bit beside the Mercedes garage and a little bit closer to that start-finish line. But before we got to the race, we actually went on the back of a flatbed truck and took a tour of the track. And this is another thing that really changed my perspective, is you don't realize how narrow the track is at Circuit Gilles Villeneuve. Whether you've driven it in sim, whether you've seen it on TV, it's hard to really give perspective on how narrow that track feels. I mean, it's a 2-lane road, and these guys are ripping through there at 200, 250 plus kilometers per hour, and sitting, I think their eyes are about half a meter off the ground. So it's really amazing to see how narrow this track is, and you see it winding, and you can't imagine, doing it at that speed, because it looks intimidating. If you were driving a road car, you'd be lifting, but these guys flat out in these cars on a road that narrow. And of course, we saw the Wall of Champions and that last chicane before the start-finish straight, and it's full on 2 90-degree corners pieced together, and you look at it and you think, if I was approaching that in my rental Corolla, I would be hard on the brakes and going around that at about 30 kilometers an hour tops. And then you see these guys do it at 130, and it just defies belief. It's amazing what these cars and these drivers can really do. So we did the track tour, and we kind of went back. We got some lunch, and there's drivers popping in and out of the Paddock Club area to give speeches to sort of the private groups. Managed to see David Coulthard walking around. Robert Kubica came and gave a talk. Went back outside, and we saw Danica Patrick. We saw Martin Brundle, Jenson Button. I mean, seeing these people in person was really cool for me. And George Russell actually gave a speech, but we just missed it. We were like 10 seconds too late. And then I almost had the chance. Somebody in our group had a connection to Jacques Villeneuve, and I almost got to meet him. Unfortunately, the Wi-Fi was really bad, as was the cell coverage, so we couldn't get messages out. So he was in the building, and I almost met him, but it didn't pan out thanks to bad Wi-Fi. And then when the race started, it was like some well-coordinated dance or something. You see 20 cars converging on turn 1, and just the acceleration, deceleration, the positioning on the track, it was all so perfect, and it all happened so fast. And you realize when you see these cars going that fast, just inches from each other, the drivers trusting each other, it's just amazing to see. And I'm sure a lot of people have seen F1 live before and they know to expect it, but for me, I didn't expect it to be, that tight of quarters or happen that fast, or the braking to be that dramatic. And to see it live is just something else. You realize what these drivers are capable of and how stable and predictable the cars are that they're driving, and just amazing to see. And so for any of you that watched the race, the middle part of that race was not particularly exciting. I mean, in fact, I sat down and there was a bit of yawning coming from me and other people. It really slowed down, but at the same time, you could not, or at least I couldn't, because the sort of shine of these cars has not been lost on me yet. It's not become routine yet to see these cars driving by. And so I like to make the analogy that if you're camping, you can't help but look at the fire. If you're at the beach at night, you can't help but listen to the waves. And there's just some things that you cannot resist paying attention to. And an F1 car driving by, no matter how boring that race was, to see it live, to hear it, to see the speed is just something I couldn't take my eyes off. And it was just so cool to see it live. So even though the race was boring, I did sit outside the whole time and take in as much as I could. Try and take advantage of the moment, of course, and it was just irresistible to me. As a longtime motorsports fan, to see F1 live is something else. And the final thing that sort of changed my perspective on watching F1 is seeing it live, you realize what these cars are capable of. And again, I'm sure many people have been to races before and already have this perspective, and maybe you already have this understanding. But for me, it really put it into context when I saw it live, and it was the speed and cornering capabilities of these vehicles. It's madness. My brain could not process it. They would come out of the final corner, can't remember the corner number, but the Wall of Champions, and we would see them off in the distance, and you would count to 3 and they're in front of you. The acceleration is just mind-blowing. It really is. Again, my brain just could not process how fast these things got up to speed and how quickly they were in front of me. It was just amazing. And the handling capabilities as well. There was a safety car with about 20 laps to go, and you would see the cars swerving behind, trying to keep their tires warm. And the lateral movement was so precise. There was just no wheel slippage. And of course, they're not going anywhere near full speed, so they have that lateral movement ability. There's plenty of mechanical grip available in those tires. But to see it live and to see what it looks like when a car is pulling who knows how many G's laterally and just doing it with ease is incredible. I've never got that perspective from watching it on TV. I watch basically every race, and I have for many years, and I've never got that perspective on the acceleration nor the lateral movement ability of these cars. So yeah, what an experience, what an amazing experience. And you know, to see Max is obviously at the top of his game right now. He was so fast. He pulled out a lead early and just didn't look touchable all race. And you know, undoubtedly he's just performing on a higher level. To see Lewis get the podium, that's so cool, and big crowd energy behind that. And you know, Fernando Alonso getting his first front row start since 2012, I believe. Amazing, big crowd energy behind each of those, behind Max, behind Lewis. I mean, it's easy to watch F1 on TV and just get behind one driver and forget everyone else. Those people are wrong. My driver is the one. But when you see it, when you hear the crowd cheer for a lot of different drivers, probably 10 different drivers on the grid that day, got substantial applause from the crowd. So to see that live, to feel that positivity, really just meant a lot. And being in the Paddock Club and seeing these celebrities and, you know, walking by drivers, which, by the way, drivers are tiny individuals. You don't realize how small they are until you see them live. Of course, you know, body weight is a big issue, so they keep themselves thin and strong, and it's just amazing to see these very small figures, you know, with such a commanding presence. But lastly, thank you to the people who invited me. It was a really amazing experience. And of course, thank you to you. You are the only reason that I was able to go to an event like this. Your support and positivity kept me going over the years, helped put the 604 name on the map, on the right people's radar, and I get to go to events like this. So I didn't take a second of it for granted. I'm so fortunate to have gone. And again, thank you to you for making this possible. So it's amazing. So that was my first F1 race, and I hope to do more in the future. Right now it's out of my budget, but who knows what's going to happen in the future. And such an amazing experience. Really changed how I look at F1, and made my love for the sport even deeper. Thanks for watching.